don't want us to get soaked up in this good conversation, I forget to record. Got it.
Yeah.
All right, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good Tuesday so far. It is kind of gray and overcast here in Brasstown, but it feels so good that I'm coming to you from my favorite picnic table. While we're waiting on everybody to chime in, we're going to do a few introductions, but we're going to ask you to introduce yourself as well in the chat. If you could tell us where you're coming from and your question for, somebody just peeled out of the parking lot. Your question is, what's one thing you're currently excited about repurposing? We're going to hear from Eliu here in a few minutes, who is a master at repurposing denim, and he's going to give us a lot of good ideas about that. But what's one thing that you're currently excited about repurposing? I know, I'll go first with my answer. I am currently sewing on a bunch of old artificial flower petals to make a little foundation piece, tiny quilt. These flower petals were from the cemetery next to the folk school that just kind of blew away off into the wind. I picked them up. So that's one thing I'm excited about repurposing.
Interesting. I'm working through hundreds of pounds of sheets right now. So that's what I'm repurposing.
I'm in the midst of repurposing a tote bag from my bird's eye bag project that I just did with Zach.
I'm always doing jeans, but in the last few days, I've taken collared dress shirts and I'm making a scarf with reclaimed thread, hand quilting that. And it should be ready by August.
Time
My
for
scarf.
Like these realistic goals.
Yeah. Sandra's working on some rust dyeing of thrift sheets. I want to know more about how that works. That's cool.
Yeah, I see several old shirts, sleeve
And our buddy
cuffs from Tanya. Colleen's repurposing her mom's clothing. That is a really special, intimate project.
I love all the idea of, just the reclaim, the stories that come with the material, right? I mean, that's one of the real beauties of repurposing. And it doesn't have to be your own story, right? Like, certainly it's beautiful if it's a family member who's still there or passed or something, but like, man, I still have a great time with just Goodwill stuff that I have no idea who frayed the sleeve on it or anything. There's still kind of a magic and soul to it.
There's a story there, whether we know it or not. Right? We tap into energy somehow. I like to think, at least. Well, why don't we go ahead and, as folks continue to introduce yourselves in the chat, let's introduce ourselves a little bit in case anybody's here for the first time. I'll start and I'll let you know that I'm Zach Foster. If we've never met before, I make modern quilts out of repurposed materials. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. I also specialize in burial quilts. So that's something that you'll be hearing me talk more and more about as the year goes on. And I'm currently in Brasstown, Western North Carolina at a folk school. And this is where I'm situated. It's a pretty nice place. Heidi?
Yeah, I am Heidi Parks. I am coming to you from the Midwest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I focus on making quilts, mostly by hand, that explore memoir and maybe even starting to define it as things that explore self-help and inner growth. And I am working both small and large. Sometimes I make little framed quilts, and I'm briefly at home. I was just in Colorado where I saw Eliu in person. I was working with the Makery, and soon I'll be working with a quilt guild in New York next month. Luke.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Luke, also a quilter, also almost exclusively reclaimed, reused, recycled, found and washed materials. And just, I'm trying to, I've just moved my practice to Los Angeles. And so trying to create a couple of shows with a lot of the ideas that I've had before, but trying to do something new and bigger. So I'm making a series of 100 quilts, all from used sheets. So that's the big thing going on over here that I'm excited about. And I'm in drifts of fabric up to my up to my neck. I feel like Scrooge McDuck just kind of swimming through. In this case, it's not dollar bills, but soon to be, I guess. Who knows? Eliu?
I'm Eliu Hernandez. I live in Colorado, just north of Denver. I am a textile artist specializing in reclaimed materials, very similar to all of you. I am currently in the middle of an obsession, maybe healthy, maybe not, with denim. And I have repurposed denim into a lot of different things, mostly quilts, but also stuffed animals and pouches. And I have my hat here that I did all of this with reclaimed materials. And so, yeah, I'm constantly marinating, percolating ideas. The ideas, there is no shortage of those. It's the resources, the money, the time, the energy to dedicate to doing more. I work as a chiropractor here in Colorado, and I'm a relatively new dad. And so it feels like I've got 2 full-time jobs before I can even think about my passion project of reclaimed materials and quilting and making with those kinds of things. I am really excited to be here, and I want to thank Heidi, Zach, and Luke for inviting me and having me on. Thank you so much.
Eliu, I'm really looking forward to it because you and I've worked together on a project in the past. We made that little zine together about cutting up denim. You gave me like a tips there. We put that into a zine, and that's how a lot of people may know you, even if they don't know they know you. And of course, I know you, Eliu, through Heidi, who is kind of the hub of the quilting universe.
I just
Luke
attract
and
wonderful
Eliu,
people my way.
Luke, have you and Eliu ever met before?
Not in person, but we've chatted.
We met in person one time. You were in Denver at the Flea. It's a big outdoor
absolutely.
market.
That's right. That my brain was so stuffed that day of trying to figure it out. Yeah.
You and Nicole were there working with your ceramics.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just such a fan forever. So
Yeah, Luke, your Instagram account was the first account I started following when I started up my Made or Remade account. And the reason I saw that, the reason I realized that is because there's a feature on Instagram where you can not rank, but you can line up your accounts according to earliest follow or latest follow. And I scrolled all the way down, and there you were, Entropies.
wow, awesome. I like that.
I didn't even know that function existed. It makes me really curious now who my first quilting person was, but we'll talk after the show. We'll see if we can figure out how to do that. What do y'all say we go ahead and jump in? I got a special project I want to talk about. Heidi, I know you want to talk about your frame quilts, among other things. Luke, you're going to be a wild card per usual. You're going to be a surprise for us. I have no idea what you've got in store. And Eliu, you're going to be telling us some more about denim. So lots of good things to talk about. If it's all right with y'all, we'll just jump on in. Yeah, okay. Also here with us, we're gonna, Heidi, if you go ahead and get Janelle queued up.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna have a special co-host for part of my session here with y'all. Okay, Janelle, I see you're there. You'll chime in here in just a moment. You'll know when it's your turn because you'll see your picture on the screen. I don't know if excited is the word to share with you, but I have a lot of enthusiasm perhaps for the project that I'm sharing with y'all for the first time publicly today. It's been one that I've been working on for a number of weeks, and it's called the Sack of Sorrows. It's the idea of creating a hand-sewn container that was worthy to hold the sorrows, the burdens, and the troubles that we often face, because life is never easy, and life is especially not easy for a lot of folks right now. And so once I got the idea for this project, it just kind of laid on me, and I couldn't shake it. So here we go. I want to tell you more about the Sack of Sorrows. I think a good place to start is actually with a poem. So if you'd indulge me, I'm going to read to you a short poem by Jane Hirschfield, who is the newest love of my life. And she wrote a poem called Vest, in which she likens the things that we carry in our life to a garment that we wear like a vest. And I think it'll set a nice foundation for the conversation we'll have for the next few minutes. It's not that long. That'll give you a taste. Okay. When you hear me say Rosetta and Wikipedia, you know I'm getting close to the end. Vest by Jane Hirschfield. I put on again the vest of many pockets. It is easy to forget which holds the reading glasses, which the small pen, which the house keys, the compass and whistle, the passport. To forget at last for weeks, even the pocket holding the day of digging a place for my sister's ashes, the one holding the day where someone will soon enough put my own. To misplace the pocket of touching the walls at Auschwitz would seem impossible. It is not. To misplace for a decade the pocket of tears. I rummage and rummage transfers for Munich, for Melbourne, to Oslo, a receipt for a Singapore copy, a device holding music, Bach, Garcia, Richter, Porter, Part. A woman long dead now gave me, when I told her I could not sing, a kazoo, now in a pocket. Somewhere, a pocket holding a Steinway. Somewhere, a pocket holding a packet of salt. Borgesian vest, Oxford English Dictionary vest with a magnifying glass tucked inside one snap closed pocket. Wikipedia vest, Rosetta vest, Enigma vest of decoding. How is it one person can carry your weight for a lifetime? One person slip into your open arms for a lifetime? Who was given the world and hunted for tissues, for chapstick? That was Vest by Jane Hirschfield. And the reason I want to share that poem with you today is because I feel that we move through our days, we move through our life accruing things. We accrue experiences, we accrue moments, we accrue memories. Some of them are positive, some of them are not so positive, but we just keep sticking them in all these different pockets and carrying them around. And by the end of Hirschfield's poem here, there's so many pockets and so many things, but the person can't even find what they need just to get through the day, you know, the tissues and the chapstick. And so with that idea in mind of the things that we carry, I want to tell you a little bit about the sack of sorrows. We were talking about it on the Nook this morning, and somebody reminded me that there are some things that cannot be fixed, that can only be carried. And that's the guiding motivation for me with this project. The idea here is to provide this container, hand sewn, that would be worthy of people feeling comfortable to contribute their sorries, the burdens that they carry around. I'm going to tell you a little bit, and actually Janelle might be telling you more in just a moment about the writing portion of this. We're going to have a little bit of a workshop with that, in which you put down your sorrows, you mail them to me. I don't know, I don't read them. I just take your sorrow, your letter that you send me, and I'm going to put it here in the sack of sorrows, where it will be held in communion with other people who are taking part in this project. And after a season, we're going to have a ritual burning of the letters that have been sent to this project. So we're talking here, if you look, let's see. Yeah, every stitch hand sewn. We were having a conversation before soft bulk about the qualities of hand sewing and machine stitching. This project was so near and dear to my heart, I wanted every stitch to be hand sewn. So even the lining, everything inside that you don't see, all stitched by hand. So the second part is going to be the mailing and the letter. But the first part, I called in a heavy hitter, Janelle Hardy, who works with people on how to frame, reframe, understand their life's narrative. And so Janelle, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more and maybe share what you have in mind for this workshop that we're going to do together coming up at the end of March.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. So I am the creator and teacher of a transformational memoir writing course called The Art of Personal Mythmaking. And it's all about exploring our life experiences and our life stories in a way that creates meaning, that brings us into the mythic nature of ourselves. And a lot of that work is actually grief work because, well, certainly I'm in Vancouver, BC, Canada. I'm a Canadian. But certainly in North America, there's a lot of phobia around grief and death and loss. And so just like in that poem, we have so many pockets of unprocessed grief and loss that we're just carrying around. And so what I'm excited to do with Zach is to take you through an embodied writing process. I have a background as a hands-on body worker, so I bring the body into everything that I do because we store so much in our bodies and outside of our conscious mind. And to move through about 3 embodied writing prompts that take 3 pockets that you've got that you know are getting awfully heavy, and start to write a little bit of a story. We won't have time to write full stories, of course, but to start a story seed out of the sorrow. So taking the heaviness and bringing it into a story that you can keep to working with. And in the process of tapping into the beautiful story, the sad, the sorrowful, also so beautiful, we get a chance to really unearth and uncover and tap into what is so important to us that we're experiencing sorrow. So working through grief, through sorrow, always taps us into beauty, our values, and into joy as we move through that. So taking these pockets, writing it, holding the joyful, and then offering up the sorrowful that we're ready to stop carrying, and sending it to Zach is, I'm gonna be helping out with that process, and I'm really excited about it.
And I will be eventually sending it to the universe as we burn up the letters after the season's over. Janelle, that's why I'm so glad that you're here, because I had this idea for this project, but I wanted people to feel supported and equipped to go through, to do the work they got to do in order to move through their sorrows. As someone who's done a lot of grief work, why go through the hard work? What would you say to somebody who says, why should I even dredge all this stuff up?
Oh, well, because it's like, you can think of it as riding the waves of grief, standing in the ocean, and the waves are big and there's a storm brewing, and grief can feel like waves are just pummeling you when you're in the middle of it. And so we always have a choice of actions we can take. We can stand in the spot where the waves are most powerful and try to resist and get knocked down and flooded with salty water and feel really truly crappy, and continue to fight it and keep getting knocked into the sand, into the salt water. Or we start riding with the waves. We learn when to dip even deeper under the crest of the wave. We learn to spread out and let the swell move us. We stop resisting, and we start to tap into the deep wisdom of grief and grieving. And that's what moves us out of a stuck state of sorrowful sadness that feels like despair. Starting to work with our grief takes us out of the despairing state. It's not that it's easier, but it's more alive. And as we move, in my experience, supporting people in healing through life story work, through the creative, through body, and using grief as a large part of that, my experience is typically we start to open up into joy. Whereas if we just keep fighting it, we just keep feeling really, really shitty and stuck. So, and then the other part of it, and this is what I love so much about what you've created here, Zach, is that we're not meant to grieve alone. And part of being human is painful experiences and the need to grieve collectively and experience and understand that we're not alone in whatever it is that we're going through, and we can be supportive as a wave, to keep going with that metaphor, lifting each other up to move through grief and into healing, and then into a new perspective where joy is as much a part of grief as sadness.
That's the hope. That's the dream. And Janelle, I feel like we're in capable hands with you. Thank you so much for lending your experience and your perspective and helping me craft this project. It was nice. It's been nice working with you. And also special thanks to Heidi who put us in touch. So thank you, Heidi, for that. Janelle, we'll be talking more. I know after this softball, we always send a follow-up email. There will be a link with more information. I can even pop it here in the chat in just a few minutes once we get done sharing. But I thought as a way of just kind of wrapping it up and then bringing it back to the textile world, I wanted to show you a couple of details that I thought were interesting about this particular project. And that is the sack has two sides. It's primarily the size of a mail sack, so, roughly. It was an intuitive applique design. So if you look at the top and you see that dark star, for me, it feels like a lot of times grief can feel like a bit of a dark North Star that we orient towards a lot of times, just because it is so heavy. It has so much gravitational pull. And so I see that dark star of sorrow right there raining down. The blue tears are actually flower petals from Little Brasstown Baptist Church right up the road here that were blown away from the grave sites. I trimmed them, sewn them down. The red fabric is a really special tablecloth to me just because I love the intensity of the red here. To me, it taps into both the aliveness of the heart, the living nature of the heart, but also that hot red coal that contains that fiery furnace, that engine of life. On the back side, you'll see that heart has a plus sign, which for me is less of a Christian cross and more of just an affirmation of what does exist as opposed to what doesn't exist. And you'll notice that on the back, there's a line by another favorite poet of mine, Rilke. He says, "Between the hammers, our hearts endure." And we do get hammered in life, 100%, no doubt about it, but the heart does endure. And hopefully through this project, you'll feel even stronger and more equipped to keep on enduring. There's a close-up of progress. Some of the flower petals getting sewn on. And yeah, I believe I'll leave it there. In just a moment, I'll pop something into the chat. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments. I'm happy to share more. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions and you don't want to share them here, you're always welcome to email me as well.
Thank you, Zach. That was really beautiful to hear the history, and so exciting to have Janelle connect. I discovered her a few years ago on a podcast for the Medicine Stories podcast, and then simultaneously she discovered you and was in the Nook, and then we realized, just so much more connection. I am excited to share a story with you guys, a story about making framed quilts. Let's just see, I'm going to show my slideshow from the start. And when Maura Grace Ambrose was our guest, I think I shared a lot about my 2013 and when I became a quilter and how things were for me then. And even just hearing you share about the Sack of Sorrows, Zach, reminded me of what was happening in my life that year. And there was a lot of grief connecting to bringing me to quilts and how healing that felt. And today I'm going to share more of a story about 2015. So a very different year, different energy. This is a throwback to when I was in college, maybe one of my first framed textiles. It's a paper drawing, but I sewed around it to make it look more special. And then I started crocheting around my drawings to make them more special. And this is an embroidery that I put in a wooden frame. It's right here over my shoulder in around 2012-13. But at the beginning of 2015, I was working on some quilts. This is a quilt that became Night Flight #1, which was a wonderful series for me, looking out the window of an airplane. This is Flower Fence, having been just pieced. And here I am on day one, on New Year's Day of 2015. I flew to Seoul in South Korea, and I think I had Flower Fence basted in my suitcase with the insane thought that I would have time to quilt it while I was there. But I learned a lot of Korean patchwork there. And that was another idea that I think for me was marinating for a lot of 2015. I learned the whip stitch and how they used it to do visible hand piecing, and was really excited about that possibility. And then I went home for a hot second in Chicago, and then I flew to visit my brother, and I was babysitting for this little nugget, and I was quilting flower fence. And then I flew from Boston to Mexico to visit my aunt who was on vacation there. And this is like the highlight of me trying on this incredible Atomi embroidery shirt that I did not buy, but I really lusted after. And here I am crochet. So, knitting a slipper in the airplane, and then crocheting a necklace on the airplane. And then I went home, and this is my roommate's cat at the time. She was such a beauty. And here I am finishing a few quilts, mending. I purchased this quilted fabric in Seoul, and I made myself a skirt out of it. I visited my dad and was photographing and appreciating more his mended apron and the way that he mends things. And we did some spoon whittling, which I quickly realized making spoons was like too hard for me. And I was more of a spatula maker in the woodworking realm, but this is my studio. And over here on the right, make sure I'm not covering that up, you can see some wooden frames. My dad helped me make those when I was a high school art teacher for a silk screening project that I really did not need handmade frames for that, but we did it anyways. And I had them floating around, and that is when I got the idea that I wanted to make a framed quilt. And then I went to the Have Company artist residency. So I wanted to finish this framed quilt right before I was a resident at Have Company with Marley Grace. And here you can see this is my very first framed quilt. And you might notice right away that it looks pretty different from the framed quilts that I am known for. So it was my first attempt, first thought, and you can see I made a quilt, wrapped the whole quilt around my wooden frame, stapled it in place, and there we had it. I sold Night Flight number 1, installed it by standing on a piano. It was an exciting moment. Here I am at the Have Company residency. I got my nails painted by Hilary Sproat. And this is the quilt that I made in the residency. And I moved from Chicago to Milwaukee, and I have stayed put because I'm not a big fan of moving, but you can see I have lots of paintings. I recently shared a lot about my history painting when I was sharing about the bird's eye bag in Zach's quilting Nook. When I moved, my roommate kept the couch because it was their couch. So I had to make a couch, or got to make a couch with my dad. I turned these wooden legs on the lathe. We made these beautiful finger joints with the table saw. We designed the quilt from scratch. And here I am with my dad and his dog Leo sitting on our freshly made couch. So kind of doing a lot of woodworking at that time. And of course, I think it makes sense then that I was thinking more about working with a wooden frame and incorporating that. In the background, you can see this picture that I made of the birthplace of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. You can learn more about that again with Zach and the Nook. Once I moved to Milwaukee, I wanted to introduce myself to everybody. So I was a guest speaker for Creative Mornings. I had learned that Creative Mornings existed when I was with Marley in Michigan. Several things broke when I was moving. My first creative love was pottery. So I had made these bits of pottery and they broke when I moved, and I glued them back together. I made a painting for my friend Kat. She lives in Geneva, Illinois. This is a map that I painted for her pretty shortly upon moving. This is what this part of my house used to look like, that corner. It's where I'm sitting now. And then finally, in September. So quite a while from that initial spark to start doing a framed quilt. I made the first one that looks much more familiar, that has this frame around it. And I was doing a lot of driving, a lot of visiting Illinois and back and forth. And I do not remember the particular car drive, but I remember vividly being in the car and thinking, oh, of course, if I'm wrapping the quilt around the edge of the frame, it doesn't feel so special. It feels a little bit like, oh, it can be stapled through, it can be on the side. And if I were instead to do less quilting and less piecing and less work, it would actually look much more special and valuable. And I was thinking about, well, how would I add it? Would I applique the quilt on top? And it came to me that courthouse steps was the classic pattern that would make the most sense to frame something. So here I am with my first in September 2015 framed quilt. And you can see that I hand embroidered my name. They have a nice smooth looking corner here. And I was in an exhibition in the local neighborhood art gallery called the Jazz Gallery, also known as the River West Artists Association. So that was my first exhibition of a framed, well, second. I had also had it on display at Have Company, but first exhibition of this style. And I made quite a few more. And then I was also in a very exciting, very fancy at the Charles Ellis Art Museum in an exhibition called Threshold, curated by Nikki Johnson here in Milwaukee. And here I am signing my name again. And look, it was fall. There used to be a tree out my window. It is no longer there because it was getting a little too big. But such a beautiful view. I definitely remember that fall. And then my dad and I got to work making more framed quilts. And you can see, I didn't realize this when I was making this PowerPoint an hour ago. Look right there, that is that first little framed quilt from Have Company. I hadn't even reframed it yet. It was still wrapped around in the corner there. Here's a video of me making what is still to date the largest sized frame quilt that I've done. It is 30 inches by 40 inches. So I'm just piecing a quilt on my sewing machine. I used to do a lot more sewing machine work back then. And then hand quilting with some mint green thread. Here it is right where I'm sitting right now. And then I was at an exhibition. And so I had made that quilt to fit above the door in this actually really beautiful basement hallway going from the permanent baggage shop to the studio where they did a lot of metalworking. Here's another in progress with my courthouse steps. This is a night flight quilt, one of the small night flight series. There's another small, I think that was a night flight quilt. And here you can see I have re-stretched, reframed that very first one that I ever made. So here's a nice little stack of hand signed quilts. And at the time I was making the backs in a very, very fancy way. This is something Eliu's been quite curious about. So here I used quilting tacks from Joann Fabrics in the quilting area, and I hand stitched to get the corners to lay flat. And my college professor, Gianna Guerrero Messia, was very interested in having the back of her framed quilts look super smooth and sleek. So I was definitely inspired by her in doing them that way. Here's another one. And I had this nice set of 9 in time to be a finalist for an artist residency for the Pfister Hotel here in Milwaukee. And this exhibition was January 2016. So kind of a full circle. And what I love about that is another idea that was germinating that came full circle was incorporating the Korean patchwork into my art. This quilt, I know the stars are there beyond the clouds. It has one seam that you cannot see here, but one red seam that goes right about here down the quilt that is a Korean patchwork whip stitch. So that also took me about a year from being an idea, that little tiny spark popping out of your head, to being something fully realized. And so exciting to see them displayed on a grid together. I don't remember who that child was, but this is a further back view of the exhibition. And then here's the next piece where those two ideas came together. This is a fully hand-pieced Korean patchwork that was for an exhibition at the John Michael Kohler Art Center in 2016. And then here's a few pretty pictures of framed quilts. And I'll be teaching this technique at the end of the month, March 27th. It's a Sunday. And I'll be sharing about several different kinds of quilting techniques, in addition to the way that now I use staples to put the quilts together. So I'm excited to be able to share just a little of that journey from something percolating to existing in the world that can really take a little while to make happen. And kind of a soft bulk thing that's a little opposite soft bulk, but also very much soft bulk, of making a quilt a flat thing that looks just like a painting, that is as stressful and expensive to transport as a painting. They're hard to store, but they're small, they're wonderful. I love mailing them as gifts, and had a big sale of a lot of them on my website this past November. And it's just really wonderful to me to get to see a quilt in a variety of forms, and to get you to think about a quilt yet again in a different way, and definitely a technique that I love to work with. So that's me and the framed quilt in 2015.
Heidi, I got a question for you.
Sure.
When we think of quilts, we often think of big, soft, bulky, lumpy masses. And that kind of does a little something for us, like it warms the heart space.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that you emotionally connect any different with framed quilts than you do with quilts that are meant to be wrapped up in?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. It makes me think a little bit initially about the Threshold exhibition that I mentioned, where I had my night flight quilts. And Threshold was an exhibition really meant to challenge people. It had a lot of difficult issues in the exhibition as a whole. And my quilts also held that tension point of being about flying and all of the stress of flying, and thinking about going through security and being in the air, and highlighting light pollution and things with the way that I was looking out of an airplane. And even the title Night Flight is a book written by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and it's about the war and flying fighter planes. And he, of course, very famously and tragically died in World War II in his airplane over a sea, or over a body of water. So there's a lot of tension and complexity and difficult content, but there's also, Exupéry, a man who was in love with flying, and the quilt being an inherent object of comfort. I think it softened and held those two sides of flying that for me has so much joy, but also is a fraught and difficult subject. So when I'm looking at framed quilts like this, I think the photos don't hold it as well as they do in person, but I think in person they are still so soft and tactile and quilt. I made a hybrid word of textile and tactile just there. So they're so tactile that I think, for me, that's part of why it's such a helpful medium for digging into inner work and deep work and challenging subjects, and making a lot of work about usually the thing that's the hardest in my life at the time. That comfort of a quilt does shine through and softens things. So yes, I think, even when they're real little, like this one, that they feel very soft and very gentle. I also have taken now to quilting them with the batting exposed on the back, because you don't need a quilt back. It's not serving the normal function of a quilt back. And the back of a painting has such a guts feeling to it as being something you're not supposed to see, that rather than those really fancy polished ones that I used to do, it feels kind of exciting to see that rawness on the other side. Because when do you ever get to see stitches against batting? So that's maybe one more little bit of how they've evolved over time and what's been exciting about working with them. Interior. All right, well, over to Luke.
All right, let me unmute. So I'm picking up on this really interesting through line today, and not to assume what's coming after, but making sort of projections. But there's this intimacy, and that's a lot of where kind of quilts hold value in my understanding, right? That a lot of it's even just the intimacy of the maker, maybe not even the intimacy of the object or the user or where it goes after that. Sometimes it's as important for the maker to be touching the parts and that intimacy there as it is anything after that. You know, maybe it's just a gift, or it's a dog bed, or it's a wall hanging, or you put it in a chest of drawers and save it for the 15th generation or whatever. But the intimacy of the act of making is one that I think is really important to quilt making and other mediums as well. But, you know, as a bunch of quilt makers here, we'll kind of stop there for now. But, you know, Zach, I just want to talk about those flower petals all day. I love the idea of, yeah, those guys that just blow off of. My great grandmother used to live next to a Methodist cemetery, and everyone puts plastic flowers there, and they would just blow into her yard all the time. And it was just this big problem of having to clean them up. That the idea of using the petals as applique shapes, I think it just, my mind is reeling. And it's
and it comes charged with story and history already.
Yeah, and
like I just sold it.
Yeah, and some great.
I just sold a. Sorry.
No,
I just sold a tiny quilt this morning that had aluminum tabs, like the candle wick tabs that hold the wicks in place. It was collected by an artist friend of mine in Seattle who went to the local Catholic church and collected the aluminum tabs. And she said, this is the last remaining thing of people's prayers. So they were so special to her. And so she was incorporating those in her work. She gifted me a bundle of those. I incorporated them into quilts. And there's just something there about the intimacy of the interaction between us, the material, and also the material, in this case, with other people.
And that pulls in a lot of the conversations that I think we all have with ourselves and with everyone about reclaimed, repurposed, recycled material, and sort of the spirit imbued in that. I mean, in some very literal spiritual ways with flower petals from grave sites, certainly. But I don't think if you take a little bit of moment to think about it, it's significantly different than the denim of jeans or the threads that were put those together to, you know, clothe your body, and, you know, some of these other kind of materials, Heidi, that you incorporate into your work. I mean, there's just something so interesting there. Anyway, that's, you know, that's not what I'm here to talk about. It is what I'm here to talk about, but I have a little project I want to show everyone, which I think is it's going to be fun. So as I was thinking about everyone, what we sort of said before, and kind of you know, this project, it felt very disparate at first, right? The scale is very different. You know, the intimacy is not so much about getting up close as much as it's about re-understanding the object of quilt and how it holds space. So it gets to be this fun through line kind of, you know, Heidi and Zach, you know, the kind of object displayed as art in the kind of traditional wall sense, but also kind of the physical intimacy of having to understand the object. So this is a series of work that I did of perspective quilts. A little.
All right, here's the piece straight on. And if I walk around the side, you can see what it looks like. All of a sudden, it looks like he's sitting straight up and walking towards you. I'm gonna walk back around. You can see what it looks like straight on.
And so this is a series of quilts that I made to sort of talk about my platform of quilts or sculpture objects. And in order to prove that, you have to kind of create a system of navigating the space around them. And I think we intuitively know that texture is a part of quilting, right? And in order to understand texture, that's a play of light and space and maybe just the feeling of hands. And that is all of the qualities that are in this kind of sculpture umbrella, and one that I don't think is as used to contain quilting as it ought to be. Here's the back of that one, because I do think backs are important, because as I'm, soft bulk sculpture, hand down on the pulpit talking about these objects, I definitely intentionally create a back that can be engaged with. But again, this particular series isn't necessarily about that. They're definitely displayed on the wall because the idea is that you navigate around them to understand the portrait. So when you're looking at them from the front, you get to look at it like a quilter and you say, okay, what are the stitches? How's it made? What is the fabric? What's the size? All of these kind of tactile, physical questions. But in order to see the I hope this is, oh, come on now, that's a video. Apparently not today. All right. But in order to see the portrait, you have to engage with the space around it. This one will be a video. And so, the idea here is to prove through the act of understanding the object that quilts are sculpture objects. You have to move in order to see it in its multiple facets, to kind of force the viewership into that fourth dimension of time as you examine that third dimension of space, as you understand the multiple facets. So you can see the portrait in that kind of traditional art. This is a picture of someone that but then you kind of have to see it from this other perspective to see it as the composition or the kind of painterly quality that we traditionally see on the wall. An anamorphic perspective is not new. I mean, there's certainly precedent from 500 plus years ago, but it really, I think, helps have some conversations about the objectness of quilts and what that means, both historically and hopefully into the future of kind of our culture of making and culture of understanding, and examining these objects as objects and not just kind of flat in a way. And that's not to say that they certainly can't be displayed flat, that there's anything kind of problematic in that, because I think that they inherently have that texture. But, the work that I make is definitely trying to kind of use the object to push some of those concepts and conversations, in this case, like very, very physically, in order to kind of move around the space and move around the objects. There's a picture of two of them that you can kind of see the portraits of right at once, but when you move around them, they kind of become skewed.
Luke, do you find that people are fighting to stand on that X that you mark, where when these are on display or exhibit, do you find people elbowing each other out of the way?
You know, not so much, only because, and what I really love is I thought that I was wondering about that too, right? But when I put them up, people actually, and I love this, examine them from multiple vantage points, right? I mean, at first you think, oh, you have to see it from this X. Done, next one, right? You have to, like, as soon as you sort of get the gimmick of it, and I'll admit to that, you know, as soon as you get the gimmick of it, you just look at it from that point and then you move on, right? Like the chalk paintings that you see images of on the internet, right? They have that particular vantage point. People go to that vantage point, they take a picture of themselves that looks like they're falling into the abyss, and then they go buy some kettle corn. But I think that these quilts, and something that I'm appreciate from an audience feedback standpoint, is that people actually engage with them on multiple ways. They did look at them from the front and they did walk around them. It wasn't just a moving from X to X. And certainly they did. You know, obviously my point is, like, you got to look at them this way. Like, this is how they're real. From a portrait standpoint. But I think that, and I was very pleased and humbled, and I appreciate people engage with them from multiple facets, which was really cool.
Luke, one of the things I've found while I'm here at the folk school, I'm wondering if there's any connection here for you. So I'll say my piece and you can respond or not. But I took my first basket weaving class a few weeks ago, and I found myself so curious about creating something that held space, like carving out a little hunk of air that could be a container for something.
Let's go for a walk. Come, let's go for a walk.
Thanks, Heidi. So like the 3D-ness, the dimensionality of a basket, and how you're not just working with material to make a flat object, but you're actually carving out a piece of the atmosphere, and you're claiming it as part of that object. Is there any connection there with how you see people interacting with your quilts? Do you find yourself thinking about the actual space between the observer and the quilts that you make in the series?
You know, only after the fact. You know, I would be giving myself way too much credit to say I did ahead of making the object. But as soon as I put them in environment, realizing that the kind of arc of movement takes place. I did design for a kind of specific physical engagement. So there was a little bit of that, in that the orientation of the figure was gender specific. So, you know, if you were the I don't remember which, the female portraits you had to see from the left of the quilt, and the male portraits you had to see from the right. So if you were able to put them on two sides of a hallway, you would actually be engaging with them at the same time on both sides. So you could kind of see them from their appropriate vantage point without having to move, you know, without having to engage twice through the same environment. So there was kind of an understanding of having to realize that navigating in an environment, and as I was thinking ahead of time, you know, making a space, making a quilt for a particular environment, and showcasing it. And, you know, not every gallery is big, and not every gallery lets me have the big room, and, you know, there's hallways and there's other places to engage, and quilts are massive. So understanding that putting it in a hallway, and actually one of the very first ones of these that I made was for the Folk Art Museum in New York City, and it was designed for their kind of smaller hallway space. And it was still a massive quilt, but in order to see the portrait, you could still engage with the portrait even though it was designed for a smaller space. So it was a physical understanding of the limitations of being able to kind of see it. So to answer your question in kind of a backwards way, like yes and no. In my case, it's more of a movement than it is kind of a carving out of space. But man, I love that idea of a basket being you're all you're doing is just proving the space around something, you know, and I think that's such a fascinating way to conceive of function, right? I mean, you know, houses are just walls to to hold a volume, right? I mean, a roof is just a topper to show where you can stand and make your dinner. And I think that's a really interesting concept. I think it's a really interesting question.
Luke, for me, one of the things that stands out looking at that series is so often we see a quilt crumpled on a bed after we've slept on it, or I'm more of a couch quilt person than a bed quilt person. So, that crumpled blob on the couch. And it's almost like you're reclaiming that look where things look disorganized or disorderly for the wall, for the flat space, because things are so discombobulated when they're all crumpled on the couch. So for me, that's a really fun element too, that it looks like crumpled or folded in a way, even though it's flat.
Yeah, I mean, just the simple idea that quilts can hold space in a way that is intentional, right? I mean, we want to display them as flat, or we want to fold them nicely, or we want to showcase the work, which is really, really important. But it's fun to think about ways, and where Soft Bolt kind of started was, how do we honor the myriad ways that quilts hold beautiful art space than just the kind of flat, let's talk about it with paint words kind of way, which is also important. And I certainly try to say it every time. I'm not at all being diminutive or suggesting that the work is not important and that seeing it flat is not beautiful, but I do think that there is a whole lot more to it that we can engage with, and I think that's also so wonderful. And a quilt that's crumpled can also hold beautiful space, as well as a quilt that is hung and kind of austerely studied.
Yeah.
All right, time for the VIP.
One of the things that I've admired about all of you for a very long time is this idea of provoking thought and conversation and getting us, the viewers or your audience, to look at things in different ways. And that you can say that about Soft Bolt. You can say that about environmental or other topics. And it's interesting to me that all of you have done that in different ways. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's a subtle, gentle kind of reminder or a nudge. And sometimes y'all smack us in the face or kick us in the ass with what you write or how you show it. And so that's one of the things that I've admired about all of you for a very long time. Reminiscing with Heidi, with your embroidery work. I remember scrolling all the way down to your plant and seeds and sprouts embroidery. And Luke, I remember seeing these anamorphic pieces of yours a long time ago, and then going to bed at night and losing sleep because I'm trying to figure out, or I'm looking at my phone from the side, or doing things like that. And it's really, really amazing. Zach, you're a philosopher in different ways, and conversations that you have and the way you talk to people, thought-provoking. And like I said, that's one of the things that I really, really admire about all of you. In the way of intimacy and how you mentioned, Luke, that's a common idea in today's conversation. I don't think we can work with used materials without a deep sense of intimacy. A lot of these jeans, a lot of these shirts, a lot of these bed sheets have gone through at least one or two or sometimes more different lives for themselves. And it's interesting to think about when we're working with those materials. For blue jeans, was it a construction worker? Was it somebody sitting in front of a computer 9 to 5? Did they save a life or do something super great? Did they rob a bank, or did they commit other kinds of crimes? And we don't know answers to those, but it's really interesting to think about the possibility that yeah, those jeans have seen a lot of things, and it's really cool to consider.
Eliu, can I interrupt for just 1 second? Because I'm wondering if you've heard that quote about Harper Lee and what she was doing while she was writing To Kill a Mockingbird.
Tell me.
Her, to pay her bills, she had to have a full-time job. So she worked for one of the airlines. I forget which one, at the reception desk. And she said she burned through, she wore through 3 pairs of jeans sitting at that airline desk, paying her bills so she could write To Kill a Mockingbird. 3 pairs of jeans.
That's awesome. Yeah. And a lot of those stories we're never going to know. But there's something about these textiles that we work with that get us thinking, get us wondering, and that's one of the cool things about it. I'm going to share my screen here. This is me with one of my full-time jobs as a relatively new dad and as a family guy. This is our daughter Adelaide at about 6 months old. She's almost 2 now and looks way different. We all look way different than what this photo portrays. But that's my family, and I don't think I can tell you much about myself without including that side of it. I've made a lot of stuff out of blue jeans, and this is one of the things that I'm really excited about. This was done a few years ago. It's obviously an American flag made with what I consider something that is very American, and that's the idea of blue jeans as something that we wear on a regular basis. This piece was quilted by hand with thread that is white and brown and black and rainbow and yellow and red. And as we're talking about things that are thought-provoking, this is one of my subtle ways of trying to get a certain message across. The thread that is holding this together, that is making it up, that is maintaining and sustaining it, is made up of a lot of different colors, and it can mean different things for different people. And I like that. I like that idea that a lot of people are going to take a lot of different things away from a piece like this. You can see what I call pocket shadows. Those are the darker, unfaded spots where pockets used to reside. And you can see those same shadows formed by belt loops or labels or seams that have never seen the light of day outside of a factory. And I like to expose those and include those and highlight those in some of the things that I'm making. Same quilt on pavement. Same quilt when we had our daughter as a newborn. I think she was within a week or 2 old when I shot that photograph. She was due right around the 4th of July, and she was born a couple weeks early. I also like to see in other people's work process shots. I love to see how people are thinking, what they're doing, how they're solving their challenges or their problems. And so I like to include that sometimes in my work as well. This is the backside of that same flag quilt, and you get an idea of the machine applique, you get an idea of the machine piecing, and then the construction of a piece like that. A little more close up. This is other stuff that I've made out of blue jeans. A quilt stuffed animal set with what used to be my favorite model, Arlo. She photobombed just about everything. And then one of the things that I like to include in all of the work I do is evidence of past lives of our materials. And for these bears, I call these butt pockets, but I include pockets. If you couldn't tell that they were made out of blue jean denim, this pocket brings it home a little bit more. And so buttons or pockets or seams or pocket shadows, those kinds of things, I like to include in different work just to get both function and aesthetic aesthetic appeal. And this pocket serves a couple of purposes. One, it's functional. You can stick a note or candy or a bottle of whiskey if you want into this pocket. But the other thing it does is it serves as a hidden seam when when I'm stuffing this thing full of stuffing, whether it's cotton or polyester or something along those lines. A little bit zoomed in with the coin pocket that most of us have in our jeans. As my scraps get smaller, I use them in different ways. And this is a process shot of a placemat that I made and finished a while back. Reclaimed thread, I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Reclaimed denim and some markers and safety pins. From a different angle, as the scraps get smaller, sometimes the projects get smaller as well. This pouch, zippered pouch, is made from reclaimed denim. The inside is lined with a reclaimed shirt. The zipper is a reclaimed zipper fly from your pair of jeans. And some of the thread that you see on the right little loop over here, that thread was reclaimed as well. And again, I'll touch on that in just a little bit. From a different angle, I include blue jeans into a lot of my own stuff. And these are on a pair of cons that I bought several years ago. And I knew that I had to make them a little more individualized, a little more me. And so I threw in some blue jeans, some pocket shadows, and stitched those up. When I'm wearing them under jeans or pants, almost nobody is going to notice this, but it's important to me to have a little bit of identity like that. As I'm deconstructing a pair of jeans, I feel like I'm pretty meticulous about that process. All of this is done with a seam ripper and not much more than that. These are the pieces that come out of a pair of blue jeans. You can see the pockets, you can see the waistband, you can see the zipper fly, you can see belt loops, you can see different thread that comes off of it, you can see the patch and the little Levi's red tab label. And it's only when I get to this point that I'll introduce a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter or something else to deconstruct those or change them into something else. This is a pile of stuff that I get out of a pair of blue jeans. The patches I've converted into thimbles. I've harvested usable lengths of thread from certain seams in these blue jeans, and I incorporate that into my work as well. A lot of belt loops. Over here on the left are what are called the yoke of the jeans, and those are little, almost triangular shaped pieces of material between the back waistband and your back pocket on a traditional pair of jeans. Harvesting thread is one of these things that I've gotten really, really excited about. I discovered it accidentally. It's probably not original. I've talked to people who said, oh yeah, I noticed this chain stitch out of the waistband or chain stitch out of the inseam of a pair of blue jeans. And with a sound, you can get long lengths of usable thread from the same pair of jeans. Incorporating that into something you make, whether it's quilt or something else, adds another level of authenticity to finished piece, and I get really excited as I'm doing that. We often think of that color as a gold. Yeah, Zach, we often think of that color as gold or yellow, but even looking at this photo here, you can see that there are a lot of different colors. There's copper, there's brown, there's tan, there's gold, there's yellow. And then sometimes we look at the inside of a pair of jeans and they use red, or I've got purple thread, blue thread. Some of the sergered inside seams are also areas that we can take thread from. This is a leather patch from a pair of jeans. I've converted a lot of these into functional thimbles. And for me, these functional thimbles seem to be the only thing that withstands the heavy heft that I need to hand quilt through multiple layers of denim, to hand stitch and hand quilt through multiple layers of denim. The store-bought thimbles, they're good for a time being, but they wear out, and a lot of them have little holes or seams or openings. I've made myself bleed way too many times with those. Again, examples of thread: beautiful red, beautiful purple, and then the different gold, copper, yellow colors as well. Heidi is showing us a little bit of that reclaimed thread that I gifted her a while back.
And I just want to say, Eliu, I mean, you showed me the way there with this reclaimed thread, that it is, because they're using it for such a durable piece of fabric, that thread is usually excellent quality thread, very strong. And so I think it's really worth salvaging.
Usually is. I mean, if you take a pair of jeans that's been worn over years or decades and you see them falling apart, the areas that are not falling apart are often those seams held together by that strong thread. And often I'll test it. I'll give it a tug, a real firm tug, and that serves two purposes. One, to test it to make sure it doesn't break, because if it breaks, I'm not going to use it. And the other thing it does is it straightens out a length of kinked thread that you'll pull out of one of those chain stitched seams. This photo here is a bunch of waistbands that I've harvested from jeans. And I like to organize them like this. This starts the flattening process, because after I open them up and roll them up, they are a single layer of denim, as is most of a pair of jeans. And so this is how I store them until I'm ready to start using them. I've made quilts entirely out of waistbands. And this one here is the first in a series of 4 waistband quilts. I call them waist knot, a play on words, W-A-I-S-T, waist knot quilts. And this is the first one that I finished, I'm guessing 5 or 6 years ago. I'm having a hard time remembering when. And then I like to photograph them in cool places. And this is a library in central Colorado in the middle of the mountains. That same quilt on that same bench from a different angle with a copper, against the copper wall there, that was allowed to oxidize and give us these cool aqua patinas. The same quilt, the same library, different background. And then again, close up and process shots. This was before quilting, but you can see some of the piecing. The back of one of these waistband quilts. You can get an idea of the assembly, the construction. You can see where I've patched over some buttonholes, rivet holes. A little zoomed in over my patch repair jobs. And that's only so that you can't stick your finger into the middle of the quilt to touch the back of the batting, whatever the case may be. This is the second in that series, and this is more of a throw size. This one took up 25 waistbands, and it's subtle, but you can see the hand quilting done with that same reclaimed thread. I'll also back it with reclaimed bed sheets, and if I have to add batting for whatever reason, often that's thrifted as well. I've stopped using traditional batting. I've used polo shirts. I've used light flannel sheets. And sometimes I'll avoid batting altogether if weight is a concern in that way. This one here took up 50 waistbands to construct this quilt top. It ended up being 80 inches across by 86 inches long. And this will fit a traditional queen size bed. This one, I got super excited when it was accepted into QuiltCon from 2 years ago. And this is the top before I did anything else. This is the finished piece. 50 waistbands, 4 more to do the edging, the binding. A little zoomed in so you can see the large stitches that I used. A lot of learning took place when I hand quilted this quilt. I was using a needle that was too long and too flexible, and I was disappointed that it took me an hour to do one 86-inch line of quilting. But with those lessons, you get quicker and better and more efficient. The back side of it, you look at my little video screen. This is the quilt that's hanging up behind me, and shimmery lavender colored backing, a thrifted bed sheet, and then you can see the highlighted a little bit as well, and the different colors that come from different threads from different jeans. This is quilt photo in the wild, and you all highlighted this photo in part of your promotion over the last couple of days, and so the hair that I'm rocking now is not what I do on a day-to-day basis, but I thought I'd wear it today. And then my favorite, who used to be my favorite model again, Arlo, with her harness that I also made out of blue jeans and reclaimed key rings and reclaimed clips. And then this is a photo from QuiltCon 2 years ago. My wife took this photo. This is two quilts, the second in that series and the third in that series, and I'm holding them up and giving a little bit of an optical illusion. But that's two separate quilts, and I went to this show as a newbie with this quilt that I have in my hands, with that quilt strapped to my backpack, and I was busting it out and showing it to people and having a good time having conversations and meeting people in this enormous convention center down in Austin. And so, yeah, one of my personal philosophies is to buy less new. And that goes for my art, that goes for my personal clothing, that goes for furniture around the house, for things like that. And so I'm excited that I can work with a material that has versatility for one, and that I don't have to buy new almost ever. So this is the last photo in my slideshow. And so I will stop sharing there.
Thank you, Eliu.
Oh yeah, thank you.
The chat is going a little crazy at the idea that you might be a guest on the Quilty Nook one day, sharing about things.
Ooh, yeah.
Also, an amazing archive. I think it's on Zach's Instagram feed of when the two of you talked about harvesting materials. That was Zach's feed, right?
Correct.
Yeah. If you go back.
And you gave us a little demo on how to salvage the thread. So if you can find that old video, it is back there, folks. And it is so satisfying to get those old pop, 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 pop. Okay, that kinetic salvaging experience. Ellie, I mean, we talked a lot about denim, but is there a material that comes close? Like, is there a second place favorite?
Absolutely. Bed sheets, I love. Corduroy, I love. Khaki, canvas, I love. When I make my stuffed animals, I've done them out of different materials, including khaki and canvas, and pillows that break down over the course of months or years. I save those, and that stuffing goes into a lot of these stuffed animals. Most of them are bears, but I submitted a beetle bug a while back to a show highlighting textile artists, and so the antenna, I did some quilting on it, but this was my own design. Oh yeah, but I know that it's an insect because it's got 3 body parts and 6 legs. Yeah, I use a lot of different materials, and I tell people I have so many favorites. So if I'm saying that this part of the process is my favorite, that's true. But also that part of the process is my favorite. This kind of material is my favorite, but this kind of material is also my favorite. And so I've got about 75 different favorites.
Tell me a little bit about your working process. Do you do sort of and sort of where you get your material? I mean, at this point, you know, you're the famous jean guy, so I imagine you're turning people down who are like, "Can I just send you bags of my family's jeans?" Or, I mean, you probably have more drawers full of other people's jeans than you know what to do with. But do you like go and you do 10, 15, 30, 100 pairs of jeans at once, and then you have kind of a stash to work for the next 3 quilts? Or do you do sort of one jean and then you sew it on and then you do one jean?
Great question. Thank you. I source my jeans from multiple places. Some of them are my own. I've done a lot of thrifting, still currently, but I've done a lot of thrifting for jeans in the past. Most recently, people are giving me their jeans, whether they're blown out or out of style or whatever. And I depend a lot on donations now as well. I have a friend who works in a thrift store as a volunteer, and I asked her, "What do you do with all the jeans that you can't sell?" And she said, "I don't know." And within 2 days, she brought me this enormous trash bag of blue jeans that were either non-functional as blue jeans, or they were out of style and they couldn't sell them for whatever reason. And since then, she's brought me at least 4 or 5 big trash bags of blue jeans. In the past few months, I've had people reach out and say, "Hey, I make things out of blue jeans. The parts that I don't use, can you use them?" Like, "Well, what are they?" "The waistbands."
Yeah.
Send them out. Send them out. As far as my process, it varies. It varies. If I was doing this full time, I might have a little more streamline in the way of the process, but a lot of times anymore, I have to depend on what I'm allowed to do. Allowed by my bosses, my wife and my daughter, allowed by my time, allowed by my availability. And we were starting to talk about this, Luke, you and I, before our meeting, and there's a level of portability that comes with deconstruction of blue jeans, and a portability that comes with being able to do stuff by hand, in the way of quilting or sewing or simple stitches that way. One of the things that I tell people about my process, though, is that I like to use as much of a pair of jeans or a shirt or an article of clothing as I can. And because of that, I have to use, this is one of my rules, I have to use as much as possible, which means that weird shapes or weird sizes, I have to respect the material. And because of that, often the materials are dictating the design. I rarely start with a plan and pick my colors and my materials based on that. I often start putting together different shapes or different sizes and see where that leads. And so I sometimes work in that order, and I find it fascinating because oftentimes I have no idea what's gonna come out of that. Thank you.
I'm excited to see an all yoke quilt because those have some funky angles. That's going to make you have to work for it.
Heidi has an all yoke zippered pouch that I gave her a few days ago, actually, and they fit together and they make a semi rectangle, and so that was one of the applications for those. But yes, I have ideas for the yokes. I have ideas for the pieces that make up a zipper fly, the denim pieces that make up a zipper fly. I have ideas for the pockets. I've started unpicking belt loops and stitching those together with ambitious ideas. But again, the time and the energy and the motivation sometimes lacks when you get that ambitious about something.
Belt loops are really dense pieces of parts of the jeans.
Yep.
That's intense.
And it takes a lot to unpick them, flatten them out, and turn them into single layer pieces.
If they become
Eliu, we have a
stuffing
couple of
for a bear, that could maybe be okay too.
Yep.
Eliu, we got a couple of questions in the chat that I wanted to put to you, and then I'm gonna have to duck out about 5 minutes just because I got a sewing circle to get to. But question number one was, Rebecca wanted to know at what point did you start desiring to repurpose jeans? Was there a moment, or was it just something you wanted to do for a while?
even before I started sewing or quilting, which is now about 15 or 16 years ago that I started sewing, and about 11 years ago that I started quilting, I was tinkering. I'm a fidgeter. A lot of you have noticed that I'm doing this rocking back and forth, back and forth. I have to do stuff with my hands, and I've made furniture out of reclaimed wood. I've made refrigerator magnets out of Scrabble and Lego and different pieces like that. I've made lamps out of liquor bottles. And when I started sewing, I was making bags, and I was having leftover legs out of those bags. And when my wife and I started dating, I was taking up her closet space by stacking and saving as a collector these scraps. And at one point she said, "You need to do something about this, or I'm going to do something about this." and I think we all know what that means. And so at the time I was considering putting them together in the form of a quilt, and I had an opportunity to do that. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the finished piece, but I also enjoyed the process. And so denim specifically, I started working with that probably 7 or 8 years ago. And it's because I wanted to experiment, make a bag out of blue jeans, or I started playing around with the idea of quilt. That's ambitious in itself. The weight of a pair of blue jeans times however many pieces for a quilt is pretty impressive. And I didn't realize how heavy that kind of work was until I started diving into it. I started working with shirting material, with shirts, bed sheets, and other lighter, more traditional quilting cottons. And I was like, oh, this is so easy to hand quilt or to machine. And then I was like, why did I start with that before I started with that? But it's been a fun process, and we're constantly learning throughout.
It sounds like you need some hand yoga after all that sewing on denim.
Oh, I do plenty of it, yeah.
And
What
a good
about-
chiropractor.
And a chiropractor. Yep.
Do you have a favorite seam ripper? You know, we don't talk a lot about materials and tools that we use, but I can imagine with denim, with a heavier, durable work fabric like that, you probably do have a couple of products you found that stand the test of time.
They are my favorites because they don't stand the test of time. I buy them several at a time because I know that they're going to break eventually. And so I have 2 in my sewing space. I've got 1 in the living room. I've got a couple at the office, 1 in each of the cars. And I know that they're going to give out and break. And when it happened, the first time it happened, it was very surprising. Like, I thought this thing was supposed to last forever. And since then, I've gone through at least 3 or 4 that just snap in different places. But yeah, the ones in the living room, I have to store them way up high because we have both a puppy and a little baby, and they're both growing, and they both can all of a sudden reach higher and higher. So my storage area is hidden, of course, but they have to accommodate for that as well. So yeah, to answer your question, I buy from the big box, and I buy them several at a time, and I have them all over the place, the way I have thimbles or other supplies all over the place.
I think that sounds, there you go, Susan. There's your answer. I have to duck out. But Eliu, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
It is a pleasure it's always a pleasure to cross your path. And I'm hoping we can convince you to come over to the Nook at some point. But you and I will talk about that.
It wouldn't take much, yeah.
All right. Heidi, Luke, I leave it in your capable hands. I'll see y'all again soon.
Awesome. Thanks
Have
very
fun.
much.
Bye, y'all.
All right, everyone. Well, this is so lovely. Eliu, this has been so fun to chat with you more. Yeah, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do more of that into the future, just because, I mean, you know, always inspired by your projects and I haven't reached out nearly enough. I'm excited to hear more, and congrats on all of your, wrangling of that the very strong-willed child.
Thank you.
Eliu, I see a question from Adamandia about if you've encountered any problems with Lycra in denim.
That's a great question. I meant to talk to that point. I've gotten to a point where I can be picky with my materials. I've got a lot of donations. I'll pass them along to other makers or other users, or to thrift stores. But to answer that question, I avoid anything stretch. Stretch for me sucks. And even if it's 1%, Lycra, elastic, spandex, I won't use it. And that's because there's a lot of shift that takes place, and it provides challenges that at this point where I'm at, I'm not interested in dealing with that. There's a lot of people that are making some really cool stuff with all kinds of materials. I've gotten to a point where I'm not interested in playing around with that stuff anymore.
I find for me, when we got to see each other at QuiltCon, you got to attend my lecture on quilting in a series, and like, how do you know if you're working in a series, or why would you want to? And I feel like that kind of internal rule setting and the boundaries that you were talking about, where you do let the materials boss you around, and then the moments where you say, no, I'm not going to work with that. Like, that's such a helpful way of defining one's work and having a memorable style. I wonder if you could speak to that a little more.
I think y'all have touched on it a little bit. We need rules to produce. If we didn't have rules, we wouldn't have anything made. But yeah, I heard your lecture a few years ago, and I've done series. I've done 2 of those flag quilts. I've done 4 of these waistband quilts. And it's with the idea that there's certain restrictions, not restrictions, restraints. There's certain conditions that I want to meet that make these have a common theme throughout. And so for the waistband quilts, they're all waistbands. I've started quilting them in different ways, always by hand, but with different patterns or different density of quilting, or with different styles of it. The flags I'd like to get back into a little bit more, and see if I can vary some of those, bend some of those rules a little bit. But yeah, I've enjoyed common themes through some of these things. The bears are also what I would consider a series of makes, and they're all the same, and they're all different. I love that constraint, that condition when I'm making different things.
I like what you were talking about when you were talking about, learning through the process, right? Like the first couple that you made, I mean, both, in terms of how to deconstruct the jeans, I'm sure by now your efficiency has gone up. But also just like learning how jeans are put together and like why they are, and then also like putting them together in terms of like what parts you want to quilt, and like, are you going to cut off that wiggly edge where the seam is, or are you going to try to like incorporate it, because it's like the interest versus effort equation, I think, is one that we all kind of skirt the edge of. So I appreciate kind of that you were mentioning earlier, that sort of learning through, the talking about a series, like your series is everything you've made, in the sense that you've learned by every action. And so each one becomes kind of a how-to in the book of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have become, as we all have, way more efficient in our deconstruction process. I remember putting a question out there years ago, and you answered, Luke, answered that question the way you were doing it. And the question was, how do you take apart a certain seam or a belt loop or something like that? And it was new to me at the time, but you used an X-Acto knife for some of those steps. And yeah, the X-Acto knife works really, really well in some applications, and some you don't want to mess with. You don't want to mess with at all. And I've started using the same leather thimble, both for hand work, hand stitching, but also as a protection type of device when I am using a seam ripper or an X-Acto knife in an area where I'm wrestling and jabbing and kind of hulking out on. So yeah.
I really applaud the textures you get out of the full deconstruction. I mean, I'm definitely a slash and burn kind of, I just want the big pieces. And, if a seam comes open, I can go like this and the thread breaks, great. If it doesn't, I'll go after it with a rotary. But I'm, staring at your waistband quilts, and I've never gone so far in a pair of jeans or anything to get a waistband out. So I appreciate all of the work that goes into getting it first and foremost. But second, the aesthetic that comes out of it is really dynamic. I love when you open it up, you kind of it's like, you see a lot of it in woodworking where they'll chop a beautiful piece of wood and then kind of butterfly it out, or, marble work or something. So I think it looks, much respect.
Thank you. That's a wonderful compliment. When it comes to waistbands, a lot of times people look at the white line and they think that that's a seam. That's actually the most worn part of a waistband that has just been faded to the point of white, or faded to the point of worn to the point of white, or worn to the point of falling apart. And the actual seam is somewhere in between those white lines, the upper and the lower white lines. Then, the fades, the non-fades, that's part of the beauty of it all. And so that's a wonderful compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, they're great. It's great to see. I've learned more about jeans watching your deconstruction today than I think I knew, even though I've gone through, my share of it. But it's very different if you just take a rotary cutter at it and say, that part looks lumpy, that's going in the, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if there's any more questions that anyone wants to kind of throw out. There's a lot of wonderful things in the chat. You might take a second to scroll through and just see everyone who's blowing you up, because it's amazing and they're inspired and everything. But I don't know if there's anything else anyone is burning questions. And I know all of us are happy to chat. Find us on our Instagrams or YouTubes. This will be up on YouTube if anyone wants to share it afterwards.
I'm a constant yapper. I love talking about this stuff. If there are any questions or something that I didn't touch on, I'm happy to answer questions or have a conversation, whether it's by messaging or in face-to-face through Instagram or Zoom or something like that.
Awesome, thank you.
I see Victoria is here.
Hi, Victoria.
You're close to your computer typing. You're not ironing anymore. So our wonderful guest from last week, if you felt like unmuting and saying hi, you could, but we won't make you. But just so beautiful to see you in the audience. And I know, Eliu, you've seen a few soft bulks live before.
That was an inspiring one. And Victoria and I met back in Austin 2 years ago as well. And that's one of the interactions that have stood out. So thank you for that.
Oh, sorry. I saw you unmute and I thought maybe.
Let's highlight her.
She was here though. Yeah, Eliu, I wonder too if there's other soft bulk themes, because I know you have seen some things, but I also see a new question from Benjamin. Do you deconstruct the front pockets and pocket bags, or do you use them as they are by cutting them out whole? It's a good question. I don't think I've seen any pocket bag information from you yet.
I try to keep those front pockets intact. And I like using those as is for stuffed animals. I've used a lot of those pockets in my pieces. I think there's a lot of beauty in those pieces of the jeans and those parts of the jeans. And sometimes I will use front pocket with the coin pocket. And sometimes I'll harvest very carefully the coin pocket and use that as a cool little thing, because the coin pocket, a part of that is exposed and part of that stays dark and hidden for most of its lifetime. And so when you bring that out to the surface, there's a wonderful contrast in the faded, the sun shiny part, and a contrast with that part, and a contrast with the stuff that's been kept underneath darkness or in the pocket. And by the same thinking, sometimes it wears differently because you are constantly hands, wallets, keys in and out of those areas. there's beauty and there's surprise every time you open up some of those areas.
What's coming next for you, Eliu?
I am in the process of making a selectified, and my
Say that one more time. You faded out for a second there.
I'm in the process of making a selecticized quilt, and that selecticized quilt is inspired by your paper towels, the ones that come on a roll that you can tear off one, tear off two, or you can tear off three. And the way I am making that is with long, I think they're almost 40-inch zippers that I found at a thrift store on a pair of pants. And I don't think I can stand back far enough.
Those were on a pair of pants.
Those were on a pair of pants.
Up the side of the hip?
Up the outside of from the hip to the ankle. And I bought that pair of pants for those zippers. And the idea has been marinating for years at this point. And over the last few months, I finally got around to assembling this, but they're fully functional. And we can take these panels apart. The back is a thrifted flannel bed sheet. And after taking them apart, unzipping them and putting them back together, you can get up to 7 different quilt arrangements, 7 different quilts out of the different arrangements, including an 8th potential one if you zip the middle panel to itself into a cylinder. People have asked me why. Just because. There's it hasn't been done before. That one is gonna be Heidi and Luke. That's gonna be a series transformer quilts that can change from quilt to more quilts or fewer quilts or into something else. I have the idea of making a quilt that once you fold it and roll it, you'll be able to somehow connect it so that it has a handle and it's portable.
I like that.
And that'll be part of that Transformer series. I haven't figured it out yet, but it'll happen. And so, yeah, like I said before, the ideas are endless. They're pouring out of my ears. It's the other resources that are limited.
Time.
Deciding which idea gets to make. That's the hard part.
Which one comes to the surface?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. This is so wonderful. And thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Luke.
It's been lovely.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
This was awesome. I love it.
And thanks everyone else for coming. It couldn't do it without you.
We could not. It's wonderful to see everybody here, and thank you very much. And all right, that's it.
Thank you. See you later. Bye,
everyone.